So, dear Minister, Ambassador, really welcome to Sciences Po. Dear students, welcome to this 60 minutes wave, and you know how to complete that, right? So we're very delighted to have you here. We feel like we're very privileged because this is the first higher education institution that you visit while staying in Paris. So this is something that we're really very proud of. And we tend to have the weakness of thinking that this is because we are the best, right? That's the weakness of Sciences Po people. But anyway, we feel there is something true in that as well. Now, something I found really important is the first time I visited Sweden a couple of years ago, that they gave me this horse about courage and strength. And last night, I had an exchange with my colleague from Sweden. I said, can you just share some jokes with me so that I can crack one of these jokes, so that to warm the ambiance a little bit so that, things go well. And he said, well, I don't want to try that because that will fall flat because the translation is not going to work. So I just gave up, right? So I thought I would be doing that otherwise, okay? So the Minister, Tobias Billström, he's Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2022. I don't know, as a minister, taking office at that particular time, that's a real challenge, given all the things that were on your plate. You're a member of the Moderate Party with a distinguished political career already at the service of Sweden. Previous roles include Minister for Employment, Minister for Migration and Asylum Policy. This is a very rare combination, so if you come to think of it, that covers the two strands, because we often talk about inside and inside security somehow interacting, and in your case, you have already practiced that, which is very rare when it comes to politics. And also very important, I think, for you as well, which is that you were also, before becoming then just right, being appointed as Minister for Foreign Affairs, you were Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, which is also a very, very important role. Now, once in a while, the international system derails, right? And at that particular moment, there are different choices. One of them is to adapt, right? And adapting here could be about just survival, but adaptation can also be a way of getting out of your strategic lethargy. And we know that for the European Union in general, and I'm not talking about the Transatlantic Alliance, but the European Union in general, I think, has lived in certain state of strategic lethargy for a certain time when it comes to security questions. And what is happening within the international system today is really important, and for students of international relations, international affairs in general, and even for students of public policy in particular, I think it's important because it really raises different questions. But it's also about challenging some of the assumptions, long-held assumptions, that we often have, we did have about the international system. So I would say that for your generation, the students here, it's a very important moment because you're seeing things that people didn't see since the end of the Cold War, happening just before your eyes, right? And what the minister's talk today would be addressing not only, of course, it's about Sweden, but it's also Sweden in the international system, right? Because many things that are happening and the way Sweden is actually adjusting to that system tells us a lot about how the international system would be evolving in years to come. And I think living that strategic insouciance, right, is something that that's many European states actually, apart from maybe Sweden trying to join NATO, but many EU states have not realized how much what is happening today would have deep consequences, not only for you, but for people who will come after you, right? So thank you very much for coming here at Sciences Po, and we really are very impatient to hear you, and in particular also because you already said, I want to give the talk, that's very good, but I prefer the question time. But before we get to the question time, your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup,
Professor Balzac and Madams, Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here in Paris, and thank you for your welcoming words. I learned today during the discussion about the high number of Swedish students that study here at Sciences Po, and of course Sweden and France do have a long history of close cooperation across different domains. And one very significant area of cooperation is security and defense. As a matter of fact, the first military alliance was signed between our countries already in 1542. But today, of course, as we have moved on, our cooperation in this field is stronger than ever. As we speak, Ukraine is in a fierce fight to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity against Russia's war of aggression. And Russia's illegal and aggressive actions in Europe is most clearly manifested in, but it is not limited to, Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine since 2014. But as we all know, on the 24th of February 2022, Russia ramped up its war to full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the most extensive and brutal conventional war Europe has seen since Second World War. All right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm used to, doing the... Here we go. You think it would be good like this? Yes, the sound is all right for you in the back? Yeah, very good. I think we need to be clear-eyed about the fundamental and long-term consequences of this war which we are now facing. Its outcome will not only define the future for Ukraine, but also the rest of Europe and the West and the world for a long time. Russia's aggressive actions have led to a greatly deteriorated security environment in Europe. With its aggressive actions and flagrant violations of the most fundamental rules and principles of the UN Charter and international law, Russia has placed itself outside of the European security order. And Russia has time and again displayed its willingness to use military force and accept high risks and large losses to achieve its imperialistic goals. But I want to underline that the European security order, based as it is on the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter, is still valid. It is a target of Russia's aggression, certainly, and it is an integral part of what we must protect at the same time. Finland's membership and Sweden's coming membership in NATO will strengthen the European security architecture. We are facing the greatest foreign, security and defense policy challenges since the height of the Cold War. And this new reality has forced us to reflect on how to best defend and protect our open and democratic societies, built on the respect for human rights and the rule of law, as well as a resilient economic system that is the basis of our prosperity. And the answer to many of our challenges lies in close cooperation with those partners and allies that share our commitment to the rules-based international order. The core of the European security order is the right of every European state to choose its own security arrangements. And by applying for NATO membership, Sweden has exercised this invaluable right. Sweden has concluded that we are best defended within NATO. Applying for NATO membership on May 18th last year, that was a historic step for our country, leaving behind more than 2 centuries of military non-alignment and entering into a new foreign and security policy identity. And our rethinking is based on the assessment that Russia will pose a long-term serious threat to our country. Our membership application constitutes a paradigm shift, but already for decades, Sweden has underlined that solidarity is the main guiding principle for Sweden's security and defense policy. And this has been demonstrated through, for example, contributions to major crisis management operations led by NATO and the UN in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the EU, as well as together with France in Mali and also elsewhere. And Sweden will continue to build security together with allies and partners, first and foremost as a committed member of NATO and the EU. And Sweden is ready to become a member of the alliance. We have done our part and continues to uphold our commitments in the trilateral memorandum. We expect Turkey and Hungary to now follow through and ratify our membership. We are grateful for the strong French support for our NATO accession, and we welcome also that France has enforced its security assurances with an increased French naval presence in the Baltic Sea. Credibility, reliability, and solidarity will be the guiding principles for Sweden as an ally. We will honor all commitments under the Washington Treaty and align with all NATO concepts and doctrines. We are fully committed to all of NATO's 3 core tasks: deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management, and cooperative security. Finland's NATO membership and Sweden's forthcoming NATO memberships changes the military strategic map of Northern Europe. With Finland and Sweden in NATO, all countries around the Baltic Sea, except Russia, will be members of the alliance. A more coherent area of operations in Northern Europe will be formed. It will be possible to use strategically important areas in Sweden for the defense of other allies' territories. And NATO's strategic and operational depth will increase and tie the Arctic, the North Atlantic, and the Baltic Sea regions more closely together from a strategic and operational perspective. As a NATO ally, Sweden will be fully committed to contributing to the security of the entire alliance. We will, over time, and with a 360-degree approach to security, take part in the alliance joint planning, exercises, operations, and initiatives. And we will also contribute to the alliance strategic deterrence. Sweden is making substantive investments in its total defense, both civil and militarily. Sweden will reach NATO's agreed defense investment pledge of 2% of GDP next year and will remain above 2% for the foreseeable future. Sweden welcomes NATO's steadfast commitment to the fight against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and it will be a priority for us to contribute to NATO's efforts in this area. We are joining NATO at a time when the emerging technologies lie at the core of the geopolitical competition and play an important role in the defense of Ukraine. We want to contribute to maintaining NATO's technological edge and countering threats in the cyber domain. Swedish strategic assets includes an advanced private sector, not least in telecommunications, a strong defense industry, and a national space capability in the making. We are currently formulating a comprehensive foreign and security policy strategy for cyber and for digital issues, which will be an important strategic platform for EU as well as for our NATO engagement. So to put it short, Sweden will be safer in NATO, and NATO will be stronger with Sweden as a member. Turning then to Ukraine and also to Eastern Europe, until fundamental changes take place, Russia's aggressive stance needs to be dealt with. And with little to no hopes for a better and more constructive Russia, the best we can do is to take measures to limit its influence and its expansion of power politically, economically, and militarily. And that is why defending Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity is of such fundamental importance, not only for Ukraine's future, but for the whole of Europe. For Ukraine, this is an existential battle. That goes without saying. Ukraine fights for its freedom and its survival. It fights for its democracy and sovereignty, and it defends the respect for the international law. Russia will, in all likelihood, remain a threat for European security in the foreseeable future, regardless of an end to Putin's regime or an end to the war in Ukraine. Hence, we need to be prepared for an extended period of confrontation with Russia. And this will require that EU and NATO member states stay united and coordinated. We are stronger together, and unity is our greatest strategic asset. Cohesion between allies and partners who share values and respect international law is central. So we need to increase our political, economical, and military support to Ukraine, further increase the pressure on Russia with sanctions and other restrictive measures, deepen our engagement with the countries in the Eastern Partnership, strengthen deterrence, and get rid of strategic dependencies on Russia, including energy. Ukraine's path to membership is of great importance for European security and a significant security commitment that we can make to Ukraine. With the Commission's positive recommendations that came forth last month, we hope that the next important step can be taken at the Council next week with a decision by the Member States to open accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova. It is in the EU's interests to assist not just Ukraine and Moldova, but also Georgia and the countries of the Western Balkans on their path towards EU membership. In these challenging times, we need to remind ourselves of reasons to be hopeful. From the commitment of Belarusian opposition activists to the pace of Ukrainian and Moldovan reforms, to the ability of the EU and NATO to provide support to Ukraine that at the start of a full-scale invasion would have seemed impossible. Cooperation between Europe and North America plays a particularly important role. The transatlantic link is indispensable, but it can never be taken for granted. There is already a considerable number of countries supporting the comprehensive, just and sustainable peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, as reflected in the key principles and objectives of Ukraine's peace formula. The bigger picture still requires our careful attention. Russia works globally to attract partners to its destructive path of non-democracy and aggression as baseline behavior in international relations. Uncertainties surrounding the possible use of nuclear weapons have increased because of Russia's increasingly aggressive rhetoric. The threat of nuclear weapons alone is a means of power for Russia, and in addition, Moscow is actively undermining the architecture for arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation in order to exploit the resulting instability. I'm talking about non-compliance with the obligations under the INF and New START, as well as the recent de-ratification of CTBT that jeopardizes the strong international norm against nuclear testing. There is a clear link between Russia's external aggression and its internal repression. And the same link is also evident in Belarus, where the situation continues to deteriorate. We must not forget that the situation in Belarus today is worse than ever for those who dare to voice any criticism of the system. All forms of political opposition, civil society, and independent media has been repressed. More than 1,400 Belarusians are detained or imprisoned on political grounds. And on the 24th of February 2022, the Belarusian regime became an accomplice in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, putting at risk Belarus' own sovereignty and independence to support Russia's crime against Ukraine, allowing its territory to serve as a launchpad for attacks against Ukraine is in itself an act of aggression. Sweden is committed to continue supporting democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights in Belarus. We will keep putting pressure on the regime through further sanctions and support for accountability initiatives. We will keep supporting the democratic movement in exile, including through the Swedish government's new representative to the democratic movement. And we will keep working with like-minded partners to keep Belarus high on the foreign policy agenda. The people of Belarus, too, needs the vision of a European future. They need hope, and they are not forgotten. Turning then to another aspect of European foreign and security policy, Europe must take greater responsibility for its own security. Sweden fully supports the progress made in strengthening the EU's common security and defense policy. And this must be done in close cooperation with partners around Europe and across the Atlantic. Through its support to Ukraine, the EU has shown its readiness to shoulder responsibility for European security and refined its security policy tools. And the support has been historically forceful through the civilian and military missions in Ukraine, the EUAM and the EUMAM. The European Peace Facility has also been a crucial instrument in facilitating member states' donations of military equipment to Ukraine. The EU needs to stay committed to provide long-term support to Ukraine, guided by the needs of Ukraine. EU's strength lies in its ability to combine a broad range of instruments. That is clear. It makes us uniquely situated to address today's complex security challenges. Guiding frameworks in the endeavor to strengthen these common security and defense policy should be the EU's strategic compass and the civilian compact. We will continue to implement the commitments together with the EEAS, the European External Action Service, and member states. France is a vital contributor to military CSDP and has an important role to play in contributing to EU's civilian missions. The growing role of the EU as a global security and defense policy actor supports and supplements the transatlantic partnership and the EU-NATO cooperation, building on the joint declaration of January 2023. A strong transatlantic link and close EU and NATO cooperation remains essential for European security. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has shown both how essential NATO is for the collective defense of its members and the vital, complementary and increasingly strategic role the EU can play to defend our interests and values. In building security and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area, it is vital that we manage to maintain unity within Europe and across the Atlantic, be it on sanctions, accountability, or long-term or sustainable financial or military support to Ukraine. Sweden and France have a strong cooperation within the EU. We will be close allies within NATO. This stands on solid ground in the excellent bilateral security and defense cooperation that stems from a shared understanding of security challenges and seeking joint possibilities. Sweden and France have made many joint endeavors with regards to security in Africa, such as the Swedish support to French anti-terrorism efforts in Sahel through Task Force Takuba, which created a strong operational bond between our armed forces. We are proud to have joined France as the only two countries with boots on the ground in the EU force in the RD Congo in 2006. And Sweden and France are also strong defense industry nations, which brings a potential for increased cooperation within defense innovation, capability development, and defense industry, and also strengthen the EU's resilience. Now, ladies and gentlemen, turning to the Middle East. The unfolding situation in the Middle East is of great concern. Sweden unequivocally condemns the heinous attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October. Israel has an obvious right to defend itself. But that said, Israel's right to defend itself is not absolute. Israel's legitimate right to defend itself must be carried out in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law. And its principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution must always be respected. And this applies to all parties. Civilians must be protected, and civilians and civil infrastructure may not be used as targets. And this means that Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza must not hide between innocents and use them as human shields. The humanitarian situation overall is of the gravest concern, and humanitarian access is fundamental. Sweden has recently allocated 20 million euro in increased humanitarian assistance to Gaza, and Sweden and the EU welcomes the recent agreement on a humanitarian pause and the release of some hostages from Gaza. We will continue to call for the release of all hostages and to call also for the establishment of humanitarian corridors so that humanitarian aid can safely reach the population of Gaza. In all this, regional escalation remains a deeply worrying scenario. Developments in Gaza, but also the situation in the West Bank with increased settler violence cannot be ignored in this regard, and continued diplomatic outreach by the EU and others in order to counteract this risk is essential. And while addressing the immediate crisis, which we face now as we speak, we also need to look forward. Any long-term solution must be premised on a negotiated two-state solution. It remains the only viable basis for sustainable peace and security for all those who populate this area. Finally, Professor, I personally highly value the dialogue with you students here at Sciences Po. France has been home to some of the key individuals shaping the ideas and institutions that are fundamental to us today, such as Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman. You are among the future thought leaders and decision makers, and I look very much forward, after having finished here, to go down and sit here and answer your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I mean, it's really a speech, a talk which is packed with lots of ideas that actually some of the students here may have probably encountered in their classes in different ways, but often in siloed fashion, right? But the way the talk actually has woven the different things about credibility, reliability, solidarity, responsibility, all these things that actually when we talk about international security, we tend to see them as separate, and we find them in different contexts. And the fact that you map the geopolitical landscape in a way that is that allows you to see how these things actually interact was really, I think, a learning process that I hope the student in the class, the adults have learned something, but hopefully the student too have learned something. So without further ado, I want to turn to the future because, right, you said they are the future. So let's hear what they have to ask. We'll take questions in rows, right? Maybe in waves, 3 questions. And then the mic is somewhere over there. So you have to go there, yes.
Hey, god förmiddag. Thank you for taking the time for being here. My question is about feminist foreign policy, and in light of the security issues that we are facing right now, you mentioned credibility, reliability, solidarity, strengthening international humanitarian law. I wanted to ask you the justification for leaving Swedish feminist foreign policy. Tack.
Thank you. First question. I saw you were raising the hand. You want to go? No? Yes, please. You can already line up so that you... Okay.
Hello, thank you for coming here. So my question is about the recent report of the Constitutional Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, which would like to increase the competences of the European Union. Especially, it would like to leave the unanimity in the common foreign and security policy. What's the position of the current Swedish government on this proposal? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk and for, I would say, the development of the security dossiers. The Swedish presidency of the European Union has had a huge impact for the whole European Union. My question refers to the relations of the European Union with China and to the Euro-Atlantic community in general. Does the current Swedish government, given the fact that you already took some important measures such as limiting the Huawei influence in 5G, what will be your position as EU and future NATO allies regarding this challenger that we are facing? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for three very good questions. I will try to answer them as briefly as possible to give room for more questions. To start with the first question, when we got into to office after the election, we made changes in the foreign policy of Sweden, and one of those was to disband or not use the term feminist foreign policy anymore. But this is not the same as not looking towards the question of gender rights or the rights of women. As a matter of fact, I can point to several initiatives that we have taken during my time as foreign minister with this aim. But we didn't want to use this etiquette because it has a tendency to overshadow what is the real important thing. You get more questions about the definition of what really constitutes feminist foreign policy than if you say, we want women in Afghanistan to have exactly the same rights as men when it comes to education or when it comes to participation in society. You get more questions about the definition almost from an academic point of view, and academy is good, but sometimes you have to be a bit practical also when it comes to foreign policy. If you start talking about the definition of that etiquette, which has a tendency to block it, then if you say that we will always view the question of equal rights between the sexes as something which is a core value for the Swedish government. It is a core value for my government that men and women always should have the same right and the same access, for instance, when it comes to education. When it comes to Ukraine, the Swedish government has devoted a significant amount of aid to see to it that we can set up centers for women who have been exposed to sexual violence during the war in Ukraine. And this is also important. So we will not abandon the question of gender rights. We have simply done away with the etiquette about it. As for the question about the discussions now underway in the European Union with the common security and foreign policy, the position of the Swedish government is that we said that we were going to join the so-called Friends group of the QMV, the qualified majority vote, once we had left the presidency of the European Union. During the presidency, it wouldn't really have been a prudent move, but after it, we felt that it was good to do so because we want to learn more about how the discussions are going on in that group of countries who believe that the time has come for changes. But we have made no definitive decision yet in the government, and I still think that it is a question and a subject that really merits a lengthy and in-depth discussion. It is not an easy thing to come so close to the question of state sovereignty as the QMV does. However, as we have seen in the European Union, we are sometimes also faced with difficulties when individual states block decisions that needs to be made. So we are looking forward to continued debate on the QMV in the EU, and we want to be part of that discussion. Then on China, which could be a seminar of its own in a way, Sweden believes in the wise policy that the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, has outlined, that we should aim towards de-risking rather than decoupling. We find this concept very useful for two reasons. One is because we think that it is better to aim for de-risking in those areas where we do see that China has tendencies, because we should never be naive about China, what China constitutes. China is, after all, a totalitarian state. It is a state where the state's influences goes through all layers of society, and we have to understand this. We have to be wary about it. But having said this, there are also areas where China's presence in world affairs is badly needed. One such area is climate change, climate discussion, green transition. You need to have China at the table if you are going to make any kind of going to achieve any kind of forward movement. So decoupling from China would lead to serious consequences for questions regarding climate change, and that is only one area. So we think that this is the proper policy, and it is one which we align ourselves to and which we will pursue as a government. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes, and yes. you can already queue so that the questions.
So thank you, dear Minister, for your presentation. And thank you for mentioning climate change as well, because I wanted to ask you about how at the war in Ukraine and your government will change the Arctic policy of Sweden, especially regarding your environmental focus with your scientific cooperation with the other Arctic states. And secondly, how will Sweden act as a geostrategic partner of the EU and NATO in the Arctic, given the future of the Arctic Council and the relation to Russia? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. So I was wondering, recently, a lot of Sweden's internal events have gained quite a bit of publicity, everything from gang violence to Quran burnings, which has been really amplified throughout social media. And throughout my 4 years abroad from Sweden, I've really noticed a difference in the discussions I'm having in regards to Sweden and a change of image. So my question is, how is Sweden working to maintain its image abroad, not only in diplomatic circles, but amongst people?
Okay, the internal security nexus strike back. Yes.
Thank you very much for being here. You mentioned space in your introductory speech. The European Parliament recently adopted a report on space defense capabilities. I wonder what's the Swedish stance on European cooperation in space, both in the scientific and defense domain. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll stop there. Just be patient, okay? I don't want to overwhelm the minister here. So to allow him to give full consideration to your questions, I think we should take them in waves of three, which gives him more time to answer. And then you might ask your question afterwards.
Thank you for your consideration, but I'm not overwhelmed. I'm very happy, you know.
I don't want to ask you 10 questions in a row.
Very good. Talking is something which I'm very good at, but it's much more fun to answering questions. Well, just to start then with the question that was asked about Arctic policy. This is important. Sweden considers ourselves as an Arctic country, and we have many interests in common with others when it comes to climate change, but also when it comes to security and defense policy aspects of what is now going on because of climate change, because there will be no new possibilities of traveling and traversing the Arctic area, and that calls for policy actions. Next year, Sweden will be holding the presidency of 3 important bodies at the same time, both the N5, that is the Nordic countries, the MB8, which is the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries together, and also the Nordic Council. That will provide us with a good platform for talking about this. The Arctic Council is a different body, but of course we will cooperate with them as well. I see this as also something where we have to link up with our transatlantic partners, with both Canada and the US, who also have interests in this area. And I foresee both policy discussions underway during next year when it comes to this area, and also discussions with other bodies, also within the UN, when it comes to rights of the indigenous people that populates this area. We need to bring a holistic approach to what is now going on in a part of the world where therefore many times, where for a long period of time, there wasn't this interest as is now emerging. There was questions about the image of Sweden. I choose to put that label on the question. And yes, it is true that we live through challenging times, and it is true also that there has been developments regarding Sweden, both the internal aspects but also the external, which we have had to deal with. I invested a lot of energy and time during this summer to have talks with the colleagues of the Muslim world following the Quran burnings, and I think it was important to have these discussions in order to explain how concepts of freedom of expression works, but also the sincerity with which we take the actions that a few provocateurs have been doing on Swedish territory, and the policy actions that the Swedish government has taken. Having said this, we also see that there are those actors in the world who want to damage Sweden and Sweden's reputation by disinformation and by aimed campaigns. And that has been going on now for quite some time.
We can see that there is a campaign directed towards the Swedish social services, where false messages are being spread around the world via social media of how social services in Sweden kidnap Muslim children and convert them into Christianity. This is a very detrimental campaign, also because we can see that it has been, these messages has been shared on various social medias, not hundreds and thousands of times, but millions of times. And behind that, we also see two countries. We see Russia and we see Iran, who really wants to push these campaigns forward. And this is not a secret, any kind of state secret, which I am now putting forward. Swedish state authorities have been very clear about the fact that we can follow the patterns of who shares this information. We also see, however, that the brand of Sweden is strong. We see that many countries have a very favorable view of my country, what we represent when it comes to values, when it comes to advancements, when it comes to achievements. We see some countries where, thanks to this ongoing campaigns, there has been dents, if I may use the expression. But I'm quite certain that we will be able to regain this with hard work. I personally believe that and think that I have to devote a considerable amount of time to travel to countries in the OIC family for the next years. Finally, there was a question about space. Sweden is one of only 2 countries in the European Union with the ability to launch satellites from our own territory. France have to go to French Guiana. We have to go high up in the north of Sweden to do that, but still France and Sweden are the only 2 countries. We want to have cooperation with France when it comes to this. One of the things which I'm going to do when I have left here during the rest of my stay today here in Paris is to go to CNAS, to the space agency here in France, to learn more about the projects and the scope for cooperation. Space is a very valuable capability, closely connected also to the question of cyber and to new technology. 2 fields and 3 fields altogether, where Sweden will bring capabilities to NATO once we have joined, which is well sought for. And it will also open up possibilities for cooperation with other countries who want to use my country as a base when it comes to launching satellites and have space cooperation. We want to do a reach out. We believe that this is one of our great USPs, as they say, for my country, and we're going to make the most of it in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience over there. Please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming here to Paris. And I wanted to ask, it's more of a follow-up question with the topic of the Quran burnings and what happened this summer. I was talking to a member of the cultural section of the Swedish embassy in Amman this summer in Jordan, and she told me that the whole Swedish cultural program in Amman was completely frozen because there was a lot of uncertainty to secure to guarantee the security of these events, or that nothing would happen because of the recent developments. So I would like to ask if there's any policy, or the Swedish government is aware of this, and if how can the Swedish government protect the Swedish nationals abroad and their staff of their embassies in light of these developments in the Middle East? Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you for gracing us with your presence. If I may, I would like to return the topic of the questions back to, well, really foreign policy and specifically arms. Your colleague, the Minister of Defense, Paul Jonsson, 2 days ago in the Atlantic Council Forum, stated that Sweden saw its, upcoming NATO membership as a way for it to, as you mentioned, have greater cooperation in terms of military industry and specifically innovation in these technologies, but did not answer the question whether the country stance towards selling weapons and military technology to non-NATO members would change. Historically, Sweden has traded military technology with non-aligned countries and much of the rest of the world. Will this policy change? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us here today. My question is related to Operation Takuba and the situation in the Sahel, especially with the current disengagement that we are seeing and the continuous instability. How do you perceive the future engagement of the EU and Sweden in the Sahel? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for good questions. Yes, we have seen a summer with a lot of difficulties. Our embassy in Baghdad was stormed in July and burned to the ground. That's not something which we have had very much experience from Sweden. And although there are certain circumstances around that, given the Quran burnings, but also the domestic affairs of Iraq, we have to take this very seriously. And so we have launched a program within the Foreign Ministry to look into the security of our embassies, our general consulates, our missions around the world, to see to it that we can give the best security that we can for those people who have been stationed there on behalf of the Swedish state, of the Swedish government. I do think, however, that we have to understand that with the activities of both Al-Qaeda and Daesh, who have named Sweden, who have attributed us in the question of the Quran burnings, Sweden has moved up as they say from the security services, a legitimate target for terrorist activities. And we recently saw the killings of 2 Swedish citizens in Brussels as an evidence of this. We take this very seriously from the Swedish government. We understand that this is something which we have to adapt ourselves to. This is a part of the environment where we live. But again, we also see that this is something which comes out of activities which are directed against us by other nations, that they deliberately try to portray us and try to link up with the campaigns which I mentioned with the social services, against the social services which are already running, trying to combine them and merge them with the individual activities of a few provocateurs who have been burning the Quran in order to create a narrative around my country which is utterly false, completely false, because the activities of those provocateurs do not represent neither the clear majority of the Swedish society or what Sweden is as a state. But this is something which we have to live with and fight with for years to come. And we just have to accept that this is the way things are now. Coming then to the question of weapons and the defense industry, Sweden has a very good reputation when it comes to defense industry. We have a strong air force. We are very far advanced when it comes to both the air force itself, but also supplementary activities such as the signal activities. We have the project of the Global Eye, which is one of the world's most advanced radar technology planes. And also we have, of course, submarines, which are world-class. All this constitutes capabilities which we are going to bring into NATO. But of course, we're also open to sell them these capabilities and join projects with others, as we have done with the Gripen fighters, which we have sold to countries like Brazil, Thailand, but to name a few outside of the European Union. And we're going to continue with this, and we are now launched an inquiry from the government into the question of how to realign our legal framework for the selling of arms as a consequence of us joining NATO. And that is an inquiry which is going to be led by the former Speaker of the Swedish Parliament, Mr. Per Westerberg, who has already been appointed by the government. And finally, on Sahel, big subject, could also be a lengthy seminar. I envisage how the EU has to be active with and in Sahel for many reasons. First and foremost, because of the fact that those people who live there now slip into military dictatorships. As a matter of fact, I feel sometimes being thrown back to the 1970s and the 1980s with one military coup after another one emerging in this region, to the detriment of those people who populate it. But we also have to do it for other reasons. One is the influence of both Russia and China, Russia most notably, who wants to get a foothold and also get access to the minerals and the raw materials which is prevalent in this part of the world, and also wanted to gain more companions in the attitude of planning, the strategy of making authoritarian rule the new concept. And there is also a third reason why we should be active, and that is migration. We can see that very recently with the migration picking up speed once again over the Mediterranean. If we want to do something about that, it's not just a question about rules and regulations within the EU. I know that because I was Minister of Migration for 8 years. It is also about tackling the root causes. And in this case, the root causes is most definitely the developments in countries like Sudan, but also following the civil war that broke out this spring, but also the countries of Sahel. So the EU doesn't have a few, it has many reasons. There are not a number of few reasons for being active in the Sahel and continue to be active. And Sweden wants to see that picking up speed. And I look very much forward to next week's discussion on that particular subject at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels, where this is an item on the agenda.
Thank you very much. We could still pick up maybe 3 last questions.
Thank you, Minister Tobias Billström. My question is related to both your role in internal affairs and external affairs, and also linked to a previous, the previous question on the widespread criminality and, narcotics trade in Sweden. My question would be, is that a Swedish-specific issue or a issue that could, ravage other countries in Europe, especially with the connection to the war in Ukraine? If we compare with the Yugoslav wars, we had the huge flow of weapons into Europe, which went through black markets, terrorism, and also spurred criminality. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Foreign Minister, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak with you. So the common discourse today is that in terms of global impact, metaphorically, Russia attacking Ukraine is a snack, and China attacking Taiwan would be the real dinner. As your NATO bid is based on full support for Ukraine and the need to protect yourself, if accepted into NATO, what would be your position and bottom line on Taiwan's security problem? Thank you.
Thank you. We can take 3 because, okay, so I'm sorry. So yes, that's that most, except if we still have 1 minute, then maybe, but please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, first of all, for taking the time to talk with us students. Yes. I have a question in regards to the upcoming summit of the European Council. You said that this is a crucial time for European and also Ukrainian security, and we also see that the unity that we have in the European Union is crucial for guaranteeing the security. Now what we've seen with Orban threatening to actually block the opening of accession talks with Ukraine, we can see that there's certain cracks. Some people say that that's because he wants to get concessions on certain funds. And I was wondering if you could comment on the Swedish position on being able to find a compromise with Hungary while not losing its credibility and opposing the rule of law crisis in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry. Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to be brief. The first question, I think, is in a way we always have to view crime nowadays as something which is international. It reaches over borders. It is transnational, if anything, and it has to be tackled in that way. We have developed over the years several institutions in the European Union, Europol, Eurojust, etc., in order to be able to combat this. And these are the tools which we should use now. There are already projects underway, learning from the experience of former Yugoslavia, where we could see that weapons, because the Yugoslavian army was, before the war broke out in the 1990s, a very, very strong army. And many of the weapon depots were then used by gangs who sold the arms on to other willing buyers within the European Union. You can already still today, you can find weapons from former Yugoslavia being used by criminal gangs around in the European Union. So we have to be cautious about this. However, we have already put up projects between the European Union and the Ukrainian authorities, and I'm quite sure that we have learned our lessons from Yugoslavia in this regard. and that we will be able to deal with this once peace arrives. On Taiwan, the Swedish policy is very clear. We operate a one China policy, which means that we only recognize one state when it comes to China, but we have, of course, dealings, and we are in favor of trade with Taiwan. I think that this harks back to what I said in my speech about the transatlantic link. We need to understand that the importance of Taiwan, not just for the Indo-Pacific region or for the US, but for the entire world, merits Taiwan to be on our radar. And we should engage ourselves with the United States when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region and Taiwan. And Sweden wants to see that commitment. We want to see that commitment within the EU. We had China on the agenda during the Swedish presidency for the Gymnich talks, the regular talks between the foreign ministers of the European Union that took place outside of Stockholm as part of the Swedish presidency. We want to see this continue. We need to understand that if we want the US to be interested in what is going on in our area, i.e. Ukraine, we need to be interested in what's going on in the Indo-Pacific area and what matters to the United States, i.e. Taiwan and China. And we need to keep this in our mind constantly. Finally, on the multi-financial framework and the question of the budgetary issues, well, yes, I gave an interview just the other day in Swedish media where I said very clearly that we will be facing difficult decisions very soon. And we are at crossroads when it comes to this. Many countries around the European Union has to make difficult choices in the weeks and the months to come when it comes to prioritization and understanding that if you are to win a war, you have to make sacrifices, that not everything is as important as the others, but you are ready as a politician to show the necessary leadership in order to deprioritize. This is not just about Hungary and the Commission. This is about all member states having to face this kind of decision, this kind of prioritization, if we are going to move forward within the discussions. That has been caused by the letters sent by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who incidentally is also here in Paris today, I learned. That's an interesting thought in itself. I think that this calls for a comprehensive approach as well. I leave the whole question of Article 7 safely in the hands of the Commission. I'm not going to say anything about this. The Commission has been entrusted by dealing with this and see to it that all member states live up to the standards set down in the treaty, and most especially now in Article 7. But I think that we have to understand that if we are going to be credible in the eyes of the US, we need to increase our financial contribution to the Ukrainian state. After all, and I've been saying this many times as foreign minister, without the military support of the US, there wouldn't have been a Ukraine today. But without the financial support of the European Union, it is very unlikely that the Ukrainian state would have survived as a state, not being able to pay out salaries, not being able to finance the whole fundamental structure that makes up the Ukrainian states. We have done good things, both of us, and we have done so in tandem. And we have shown that we are quite able to cooperate on this if we want to. But we have at this moment in time to show the US public and the US politicians that we are able to do what is necessary in the European Union to finance Ukraine, and stepping up on military support as well, because that's also part of the whole package. If we don't do that, we might be facing severe consequences with the failure of the Ukrainian state, and that would be very bad in itself. So my message, the message from the Swedish government is we have to make those difficult decisions in order to move on, and we have to face them down if we are going to get through this budgetary discussion at the European Council and move on to the next stage in this war, with seeing to it that the Ukrainian state actually can win a victory in the battlefield and restore its territorial integrity, which is the only way that we can make Russia change its strategic goals. And this is the primary and most important foreign policy topic on the agenda of the Swedish government. Nothing else is as important as seeing to it that Ukraine wins a victory in the battlefield and that this war is concluded with a Ukrainian victory. Thank you very much.
Thank you.